Ted Kaczynski's dead. And I wanted to write him at some point, but I decided against it because I felt like anybody who writes Ted Kaczynski is going to get put on a list. And I feel bad. I want to write him after his diagnosis for cancer came in. I felt like, I say on a list. I know I'm already on a list, but I just didn't want to invite problems into my life. And he couldn't. I sat down and I was thinking about what to write him, and I couldn't think of anything. I wanted to kind of outline to him how terrible everything is, and how he's really not even missing anything being in the outside, because it's just like a fucking nightmare. And I decided against that because it's like, I don't know. I didn't want to be too depressing and write a man in prison and say like, nah, really, it's better in there, because it's like shit sucks. He mentioned in his book that he had gender issues. He was seriously considering transitioning, and this was back in like the 60s. So he goes into one of the first gender clinics in the world that's in Colorado, and he visits the doctor there. He sits in the waiting room, and around him in are transvestites, some of the first adopters of the transvestite lifestyle. It's now just called being transgender. And he was literally so disgusted that he like had a psychological break. He quit his job. He moved to Montana, and he started sending pipe bombs in the mail to academics because he was so angry at them for the agenda they had pushed. And he was so prescient in everything that he said. The most important things about what he wrote about in industrial society and its future were about what he called the over-socialized male. And it's true. That is the issue. That people are being led down this road where the most important thing in their life is how others perceive them. And it lets people become completely obedient to having people think a certain way about them, and it overrides everything else in their life. It overrides their interest in their performance and their self-fulfillment and starting families and being authentic to themselves, being male or being female even. And it's disastrous. Industrial society and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And so I do encourage people to read his book, unironically, because it is interesting. Not everything is very agreeable, and he is I think most controversially a direct proponent to violence. He explains how the system abhors violence, and how even when proponents of the system engage in violence, such as the police, like with the George Floyd shit, the system will come down very hard on them because it does not want violence. It doesn't even want violence from the system. The system prefers not to use violence whenever possible. If it can coax people into conformity and obedience without violence, it will always prefer to do that. And it will never directly try to use violence to quell things, because violence begets violence, and the system is terribly afraid of violence. It's extremely interesting, very, very thought-provoking, very prescient because of its age and what it says about transgender shit in particular, and over-socialization. And we say except blacks, but the prison system is full of blacks. The prison system is mostly blacks. I think it's, despite being 13% of the population, they're more than half of the, 3 million people currently in prison right now. It's mostly blacks because the system will try not to tolerate violence from blacks if it can. It's just that black areas are so violent and the police are so understaffed that they can't really enforce the system as well as they can in the black areas. So, yeah, it's not that they tolerate black violence. They really don't. People leftists might tolerate black violence as being rebellion, but the system itself unanimously comes down hard on violence because of, and I do agree with that. I have read The System's Neatest Trick. The System's Neatest Trick is his other writing. It's very good. It explains, again, it goes into detail about how the system, it perpetuates itself accidentally. It's sort of like an organism, as he explains, that has coincidentally, kind of, through sort of coincident, it's like evolution. Evolution is happenstance, but at the same time it's inevitable. it's inevitable that under certain circumstances, life will evolve to have certain features to overcome those circumstances. And in the same way, the system is brilliant in its design, and it doesn't require design because it's happenstance. But at the same time, the set of circumstances that exist in industrial society force it to exist. It is inevitable that this system will develop itself, and the system perpetuates and it encourages obedience and so on and so forth, almost accidentally. And it's brilliant in that it explains how there is both a conspiracy and also there is no conspiracy in some ways, that so many facets of the system plug into the system and operate the system, but you don't have to demonstrate direct conspiracy between those components because the system just encourages it, and it is self-replicating and ingenious, and it doesn't require a direct meeting of the mind. It just has a way of existing and encouraging compliance and encouraging people and corporations to do what it wants to do without necessarily needing to come out and say, do this. It's really brilliant. And yes, Yarvin is also a lot like that. When he talks about the cathedral, he's basically talking about what Kaczynski would call the system. And it is true. That's the difficult thing to understand, is that when you say that there's like a conspiracy of certain people to perpetuate the system, then people will say, well, there's no conspiracy because, you know, nobody has to reach out to Anheuser-Busch and say, run this gay shit on your Bud Light because that's what we want. It's just that the system encourages it indirectly, and people try, because they're over socialized and for various financial interests, they try to be a part of the winning side, the right side of history, and participate in the system without actually having to be forced to do so. And that is the system's genius trick. So yeah, I will I'll leave it there. I don't want to go on too long and talk philosophy because I know that's fucking gay and nobody wants that. However, I am considering doing a reading of one of Kaczynski's books for the Gumroad people, because I have been neglecting the Gumroad people. I'll look at that and see. I know I'm not the most talented elocutionist. I'm not the best reader of stuff, but it would be funny. It would be a nice meme. So I may do it just for funsies.